This video has been made possible thanks to the popular online PvP strategy game, Conflict of Nations. In this latest VisualPolitik video, we are going to tell you how Japan is doing everything in its power to become a naval superpower in order to be able to face off against the Chinese Navy. We are certain that if you like these topics, Conflict of Nations is made for you. Conflict of Nations is available on PC and mobile, and an ideal pastime for those of us who like to spend some time speculating on the defensive capabilities of different countries. In Conflict of Nations, you'll be in control of the armed forces of one of the world's leading nations. You get to manage the economy, diplomacy, weapons research, troop mobilization, and form alliances. To ensure economic efficiency and technological edge over one's opponents, each nation must be carefully managed and developed. Researching new units while building the required infrastructure is the key to winning the game. After all, modern war is about logistics as much as combat tactics. And now the best part of all, you can unlock your exclusive gift of 13,000 units of gold and get 1 month of premium subscription for free by clicking on the link in the description. This offer is only available for 30 days, so be quick and start mobilizing your troops and planning your battle. Of the 5 largest economies in the world, one in particular is primarily a maritime power. Yes, we're talking obviously about Japan. The peculiarity of Japan, besides the fact that it is an archipelago, is that its territorial seas and inland waters add up to more surface area than it has on the mainland. We're talking about 430,000 square kilometers versus just under 380,000. And of course, to this, we would have to add the exclusive economic zone. That is, those waters that are not strictly part of a country, but over which it has special rights to exploit its resources. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, this zone extends 200 nautical miles from the coast. In short, Japan has much more sea than land to defend. And that's not all. Apart from mere geography, if we look at where Japan's population is concentrated, we see that approximately half of its 126 million inhabitants live close to its 35,000 kilometers of coastline. All this makes Japan a country essentially turned towards the sea. A country that, both for its economy and for its own defense, looks above all to maritime zones. In other words, we are not only talking about a geographic issue, but above all, an economic and military one. For example, more than 99% of Japan's international trade is conducted by ship. This includes 80% of all the energy and 99% of the oil they consume. In other words, without secure seas, or seas under its control, or the control of its allies, the entire Japanese economy would be exposed to enormous vulnerability. And take note, because as we shall see, this concept determines to a large extent all the security plans of the land of the rising sun. Here, the sea is worth twice as much. And of course, think about it for a moment. We've already told you, here on VisualPolitik, how China is building the world's largest naval fleet by number of ships. And we've also told you how Beijing's ambitions are precisely to control the seas around them. And obviously, this has many implications for its neighboring countries, including Japan itself.
China's navy sets record pace for intrusions into Japan's territorial sea. Plan: People's Liberation Army Navy vessels have entered Japanese territorial waters 8 times since 2004, and 5 of those have occurred since October 2021.
Given such a situation, it is hardly surprising that this is causing increasing concern in Japan. And do you know what? That's precisely why they're getting their act together. VisualPolitik viewers, in this video, we're going to tell you how Japan now seems determined to build a strong naval air defense to protect its coasts, along with its economic and territorial interests. And of course, we will also tell you what its weakest points are. Are we witnessing a new military awakening in the land of the rising sun? To what extent could Japan, a great economic power, also become a military power and a key player in the Asia-Pacific? Why could naval power be fundamental in guaranteeing Japan's security? And we're not just talking about China. So let's get started.
Be sure to secure the supply lines.
Take a look at this map for a moment. What you are looking at are the main sea lines of communication known as the slocks. We're talking about routes of thousands of nautical miles through which pass not only the bulk of Japan's exports and imports, but also those of some of the world's largest economies such as China and South Korea. And keep in mind that when we talk about exports and imports, we are not only referring to consumer goods, but also, and perhaps even more importantly, to industrial equipment and energy supplies. give you an idea, approximately half of all the liquefied natural gas imported by Japan passes through one of the hotspots in the slots shown on the map. Particularly important are the areas of the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, and the Taiwan Strait. And take note because we are talking about huge volumes. With just over 74 million tons per year, Japan is, for example, the world's second largest LNG importer, just behind China, which topped the podium in 2021. And that is only if we're talking about gas. Because if we talk about oil, then the importance of these offshore hotspots is much higher. 90%. Yes, 90% of all the oil that Japan imports comes from the Middle East. So it has to pass all these hotspots where anything can happen. And believe me, none of it is good. For example, the Strait of Hormuz, which separates the United Arab Emirates and Oman from Iran, is less than 34 kilometers. That's just 24 miles wide at some points. And this becomes even more important when we take into account the fact that we're talking about a particularly tense area due to the threats and even attacks and assaults that Iran recurrently commits against merchant ships.
Japan ship attacked near Strait of Hormuz, US blames Iran. South Korean tanker seized by Iran in Strait of Hormuz.
These headlines are just two examples, but the list is long, very long. In fact, this type of tension, far from diminishing, seems likely to increase. So, as you can imagine, military operations by the countries most interested in securing their supply lines are becoming quite frequent in these areas, particularly with regard to ship escorts.
Japanese warship departs for Gulf to patrol oil lifeline. Thousands of Japanese ships ply those waters, the Gulf, every year, including vessels carrying 9/10 of our oil. It is Japan's lifeline. Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe at Yosuga Naval Base near Tokyo.
The problem is that if you think that after passing the Strait of Hormuz, everything is a piece of cake, I'm very sorry to disappoint you, but you're very wrong. After making it safely across this zone, ships filled with LNG, oil or cargo, heading for Japan and South Korea, have to face a second hot zone, the seas of Southeast Asia. Seas where the risk is twofold. We're talking about China and also about pirates. The fact is that if I were to ask you which is the area on the planet that suffers most from piracy and ship hijacking, surely many of you would answer that it is undoubtedly the Horn of Africa around Somalia. Right? Well, wrong. Well, it is true that the Horn of Africa used to be the cradle of modern piracy. However, the area of the world with the most pirates, accounting for about 60% of all cases today, is located in Southeast Asia. We are talking in particular about the areas of the Straits of Malacca and the Sunda Straits, and the areas close to the coasts of Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Malaysia. These are the hottest spots, but even north of Taiwan, attacks have been reported. And yes, if you take another look at the slot map we showed you earlier, you will see that the main import and export routes of Japan and South Korea also pass through there. This obviously requires an extra level of security to be deployed in the area, which is usually achieved through international collaboration between the countries concerned and the sovereign countries in the waters. The problem? Well, many of these Southeast Asian countries do not yet have strong navies or sufficient resources with which to secure their seas. So the great responsibility falls on the countries themselves to protect maritime traffic. This includes China and the United States, but for countries like Japan, that may not be enough. Tokyo is not amused that the security of its supplies depends on the goodwill of Xi Jinping. For this reason, Tokyo has gradually tried to develop an ambitious naval defense policy. In 1981, Prime Minister Zenko Suzuki implemented the so-called 1,000-mile sea route defense policy. Basically, this policy consists of Japanese military vessels reserving the right to intervene to protect their commercial interests in an area up to 1,000 nautical miles away from Japanese territory. This is what partly explains why Japan has put so much effort into making territorial claims on distant islands, some that, in theory, seem absurd. Well, what they are trying to do is to move this line of maritime defense as far away as possible, while at the same time trying to legitimize it in some way. And that, VisualPolitik viewers, is what explains news stories like this.
Japan to spend millions on tiny islands 1,000 miles south of Tokyo.
The problem is that, because of its historical reluctance to build a large military, Japan does not have sufficient capabilities to enforce such a policy. So, in practice, China has continued to gain ground over the years. To make matters worse, one of China's excuses for expanding in and around the South China Sea is precisely Japan's aggressive maritime defense approach, which causes the two countries' areas of interest to overlap. The result is that as China has been modernizing its armed forces and building the largest navy on the planet, Tokyo's unease and tension has been growing more and more, and especially in the wake of Xi Jinping's ever-increasing ambition. In this sense, the seizure of Hong Kong and the constant hostility towards Taiwan have been real turning points for the Japanese government. A government that is beginning to have a real fear of ending up in practice as a satellite country, or at least a country subject to Beijing's designs. And here we come to the third key area that explains why Japan has its sights set on becoming a naval superpower once again. And there you have it. The Taiwan Strait is probably the most militarily tense area in the East Asian seas. We're talking about a strait that is particularly relevant to Japan for two reasons. The first is that Taiwan is a country that is literally under the implicit protection of Japan. As we told you in a past video, Japan's economic and strategic interests in Taiwan are enormous, so its stability is key, not only in political terms, but also for Japanese companies themselves. The second reason has to do with the same thing we have been insisting on in this video. The long supply and goods route that connects Japan, Europe, and the Middle East also passes through the Taiwan area. In other words, virtually the entire Japanese economy depends on the stability of a number of areas that are becoming a powder keg of tensions and threats. And to make matters worse, today, that stability is becoming increasingly dependent on China. In other words, the biggest threat to Japan is not so much that China might one day want to start a war or invade Japan. No, the greatest threat has much more to do with Beijing's ever-increasing ability to strangle, pressure, and coerce Japan. So with all this in mind, the question is very clear. What options do the Japanese have to protect their economy, their supply lines, and the country's own national integrity? On the one hand, to increase and deepen its international alliances, which is precisely what it is doing with the United States, the United Kingdom, with India, Australia, and even with South Korea.
South Korea, Japan set first high-level defense talks in 6 years. India and Japan to hold more military drills to deepen ties. Japan, Australia upgrade security pact against China threat. Japan to sign military pact with UK as allies eye China threat.
And on the other hand, to rebuild its navy and become a major maritime power once again. With the rise of China in the region, they have no choice, unless they want to end up becoming a vassal country. And guess what? In Japan, they know it.
Japan's new Defense of Japan 2022 paper calls for massive military build-up to counter China.
Exactly. Japan wants to rearm at full speed, and wants to do it, above all, by betting on the sea and on ballistic technology. Having said that, do you want to know more details about Japan's plans to become a full-fledged military power again? Well, let's take a look.
The new dawn of the rising sun.
Japan is back in the military field. That is something nobody can deny. And as we mentioned, of all the spending that is going on to be done to strengthen military capabilities, the so-called Maritime Self-Defense Force and the Air Force are going to take the lion's share. In other words, the goal will be to create a new naval air force capable of defending Japan's interests throughout the region, being much less dependent on the United States and even capable of rivaling China. That is the goal. Now, what exactly are we talking about? Well, you see, Japan intends to spend just over $300 billion over the next 5 years on its armed forces. In this way, they intend to spend at least 2% of GDP on defense, when up until now, that figure barely reached 1%. With this plan, the Japanese will have the third largest military budget in the world, behind only the United States and China. Quite a turnaround in decades of military policy. At the moment, the Japanese government has not presented a clear, comprehensive plan that tells us what all its priorities will be. However, some projects are already beginning to be announced. For example, we have the case of 2 destroyers with ballistic missile defense capabilities, in which Japan has invested some $7.1 billion. And I don't know, it may not seem like much, 2 more ships. However, the reality is very different. When delivered, they will be Japan's largest destroyers, and 2 of the largest in all Asian waters. We're talking about 20,000 tons each, and 210 meters. That's around 690 feet long. These ships, which are expected to be delivered around 2027, will also be equipped with the most advanced Aegis combat system, with SM-3 interceptor missiles, which are currently the creme de la creme in their class. Of course, this is not the only new feature.
Japan commissions first new Mogami-class multi-role frigate. The Kumano is the first of a planned 22 vessels of the class, which will include capabilities never seen before on a Japanese frigate.
In fact, it is this new group of frigates that Japan will use on maritime surveillance missions inside and outside Japan, including in the South China Sea area, where we have told you there are so many problems. But there is still more news. For example, Japan announced in March of this year that, as it did with the first vessel, it will begin work to convert the second Izumo-class multi-purpose destroyer into an aircraft carrier. The two ships of this class will thus become the first Japanese-flagged aircraft carriers since the Imperial era. These carriers will also operate 42 fifth-generation F-35B vertical takeoff fighters that will be used to deter China from conducting air raids both in Japan and in the skies of its allies. In addition, when added to the F-35As that Japan already has, or has orders for, the country will operate a whopping 147 of these aircraft within a few years. This will be the second largest F-35 fleet behind only the United States. As you can imagine, all this together with the US Global Hawk drones and two new Boeing KC-46A refueling tankers will provide the Japanese with a very, very significant naval air defense capability. And that is not all. This news item has recently come to light.
Japan, Britain, and Italy plan 6th-generation fighter jet to rival world's most advanced warplanes.
Japan, the United Kingdom, and Italy will jointly develop, with US backing, a state-of-the-art fighter jet to complement their F-35 fleets and far surpass the military capabilities of China and Russia. This is the objective that these three countries have made public, an agreement that could soon be joined by more good news. In fact, the Japanese want to take their rearmament so far that they are even considering developing a hypersonic missile. Yes, a hypersonic missile that would enter service by 2030.
Japan weighs hypersonic missile deployment by 2030 to boost deterrence.
Impressive, isn't it? We're talking about Japan. For those of you who have been following us for a long time, already know that since World War II, Japan has always been reluctant regarding all things military. And not only because of the peaceful spirit of its constitution, but also because of a kind of social conviction. But all of that is over now. The rules of the game have changed with the military rise of China, with North Korea that keeps provoking with ever more advanced missiles, and with Russia that is dedicated to invading other countries. And don't forget one other detail, that Japan and Russia practically border each other and have an open territorial dispute over the Kuril Islands. Japan has just approved its new defense strategy, which includes, among other things, the ability to conduct counterattacks against military bases abroad. In addition, Kishida does not rule out going further in the future, including the possibility of preemptive strikes.
16th of December 2022. Japan okays enemy base strike capability in major defensive policy shift.
Something that would be easier to fit into its legal framework with a reform of the constitution. A reform that has more and more supporters in Japanese politics. Anyway, that's the way things stand. The question is now for you. Do you think Japan will eventually become a full-fledged naval air power capable of rivaling China itself? Could Japan become the right-hand man of the United States in the region? Leave us your opinions below in the comments. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. And remember that you can also actively support us by joining our community on Patreon, and we'll leave you the link below in the description. And remember that if you want to feel like Douglas MacArthur and speculate on military strategies, the free online PvP strategy game, Conflict of Nations, is worth checking out. Click on the link in the description to get your unique starter pack, but remember that the offer is only available for 30 days. As always, thank you very much for watching, all the best, see you next time.